Right. Um, so today we're going to be going over a tour of. Um, Last week we talked about rabbinic literature, meaning Mishnah, Talmud, the things that become halacha. And this week we're going to be talking about the areas of Jewish study that aren't really halacha, that are what you could call Jewish thought, right? Other forms of Jewish literature. Um, Before we dive in, though, I want for our weekly Parsha study, we're at the um, we're at the end of the Torah, and I want to show you a little bit about how it ends. So this is the end of the Torah, chapter 34. Anybody else want to read this English? I guess no one wants to read. Okay, I guess I'll read it. Can anybody please read Schroeder's? Okay, is anybody willing to read?
I
Oh,
will,
sure.
sorry.
Oh, thank you, Lane.
Moses went up from the steppes of Moab to Mount Nebo to the summit of Pisgah, opposite Jericho, and Adonai showed him the whole land, Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, the whole land of Judah as far as the western sea, Mediterranean Sea, the Negeb and the plain, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Sawar. And the Lord said to him, This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will assign it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your own eyes, but you shall not cross there. So Moses, the servant of God, died there in the land of Moab at the command of Adonai. God buried him in the valley in the land of Moab near Beth Peor, and no one knows his burial place to this day. I just learned something about this recently. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. The Israelites bewailed Moses in the steeps of Moab for 30 days. The period of wailing and mourning for Moses came to an end. Now Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands upon him, and the Israelites heeded him, doing as the Lord had commanded Moses. Never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, whom Adonai singled out face to face, for the various signs and portents that Adonai sent him to display in the land of Egypt against Pharaoh and all his courtiers and his whole country, and for all the great might and awesome power that Moses displayed before all Israel.
Great. Um, any any comments on why it ends the way it ends?
This particular verse or all of it?
Well, this is the Torah. This is the end of the Torah. This is the absolute end of the Torah. So we started at the beginning, we end at the end. Next class we'll go to the beginning again. But why does it end? Why does it end this way? Any comments on how it ends?
Now, my thought is that there's such a substantial portion of the Torah that is related to Moses that at that point, Israelites had basically completed their what I would call childhood, and they're now on their own essentially.
Okay, so this is in some ways a eulogy for their parent who raised, or maybe their nanny who raised them and reared them until they were able to be off on their own.
Right.
Okay, Melina?
Everything that Hashem wanted to transfer to the nation is done by Moses.
Yes.
And to me, it's more, I apologize for saying that. It's just my personal thought that I'm adding. To me, it means that the Judaism is the real religion, Like it's finished. To
Right.
me,
Well,
it's like that.
yeah, when it says never again did there arise in Israel a prophet like Moses, right? That does imply you can't replace the Torah, right? Definitely implies that. By the way, some people say there are people who say, well, never again until the next Moses. Who's the next Moses that we hear about all the time? We read him all the time.
The Messiah?
What?
The Messiah? The
Not
Messiah?
Mashiach, not Mashiach. No, someone whose books we refer to this guy almost every class. But we don't we normally we abbreviate his name, the M in his name.
Rambam?
Yeah, Rambam. Yeah. So there's some people who say, oh, from Moses to Moses, there hasn't been another Moses, but he was just as big as Moses. Um, by the way, he wrote his Mishnah Torah. Well, Deuteronomy is called the Mishnah Torah. It means the repetition of the Torah. But I don't want to focus on that part. But definitely, Melina, you're right. There's this idea that this closes the book. We can interpret it, but like you're not going to replace this book. The last letter of the Torah in Hebrew is actually look in English. What's the last letter? What's the word for Israel
Lamed?
in Hebrew? Yeah, it's a lamed. And the first word of the Torah
Bet?
is a bet. And what does lamed bet spell?
Lev, heart.
Lev, heart. Yes. So why do we have the Torah's initials meaning heart?
That it would be, the heart of God.
Okay, so it comes from the heart of God or reflects the heart of God.
I would suggest because God wants the heart.
Okay, so maybe it goes from God's heart to our heart, and God wants our heart. Great. Another thing that I want to point out about this before we go on, it says, well, let's see what oh yeah. So Ramban, Nachmani says, it ends with great might and power. This is justice. This is mercy. I don't love that one. I'm not that excited about it. The other thing though about this chapter is the last thing God does. Verse 6, God buries him in a valley in the land of Moab. And in the end of the first chapter of Genesis, God feeds some hungry people. God clothes some naked people, Adam and Eve. So the Midrash says the Torah begins and ends with Chesed. It begins with God clothing Adam and Eve. It ends with God burying Moses. In the middle, God feeds some hungry people. When does God feed hungry people?
When they're in the wilderness.
Yeah, in the wilderness. And then God visits somebody when they're sick. Anybody know who that is?
Abraham after his circumcision?
Yep, Abraham after circumcision. Yeah. So this, yeah. So that's what they say is Torah begins and ends with Chesed. Okay. So as I said, I want to talk today. We talked last week about English. We talked about the trail from Torah to Halakha, right? That we have the Torah, and really, as far as Halakha goes, we don't generally rely too much on the prophets and writings. Sometimes there's reference to them, but generally speaking, Halakha is in the Torah. But then it jumps to the Mishnah, that has the basic rules without spelling out why. Often they'll have disagreements on those rules. And then the Midrash will have there is sometimes Midrash which explains how the Mishnah gets there. And then what's the book that discusses the Mishnah?
Talmud.
That's the Talmud, right? The Talmud so the Mishnah was written around 220, and then the Talmud written between 600 800 discusses the rules of the Mishnah. And then after them, Rashi and the Tosafot discuss passages from the Talmud, They'll discuss difficulties in passages from the Talmud. And then you get halacha, which is based on all of that, comes up with, okay, what's the halacha? So that's the line from Torah to halacha. There's a whole nother world of Jewish religious literature. So when we talk about Torah study, right, we don't just mean Torah as in the 5 books of Moses, we mean in this bigger sense. And there's a whole world there. So I'm going to start with the Midrash. So Midrash is interpretations of Torah verses, looking very closely at those verses. So, and it can be either stories or it can be halakha. So we're going to look at both stories and halakha. So, so this is about, what? I'm sorry. Okay. This is a verse, this is in the Talmud. And I'm calling it a midrash because the form of it is drawing some conclusion from a verse. So from where do we know that one who sees someone drowning, being dragged by a wild animal, or being threatened by robbers is bound to save him? We learn it from the verse, do not stand aside while your fellow's blood is being shed. Any comments on, so would this have been obvious to you from this verse? What is it adding anything?
I mean, isn't it pretty obvious, to be honest? I mean, if I see somebody drowning, I mean, everybody, it would be like a normal impulse to help that person, wouldn't it? Same with somebody being dragged by a wild animal or being threatened by robbers.
There are some famous cases in America where, I forget who it was, there's been famous incidents where people have been attacked and no one else called 911. People just ignored them.
But
So
is that even like in Europe, this is, if you do that, you are kind of implicated. I mean, like legally, you can be charged
well,
if you don't help.
Is that in part a reaction to the Holocaust?
I don't know, but if I don't call, I mean, I'm not obliged to endanger myself, but if I see something happening and somebody's life being endangered and I don't call 911, then I will be charged.
Okay, so I don't know in America that we have such a law. And there have been cases where without that law here in America, people don't. Like they don't call 911. And there have been people who I've heard other cases where people are in trouble, no one calls 911, and then the person ends up being killed. So unfortunately, we don't have such rules on the book. Right? The culture you're describing where people know they have to is in part because of those rules. So that, and I wonder, I really wonder if those rules are reactions to the Holocaust because, with the Nuremberg trials, everyone's favorite excuse was either I didn't know or like it wasn't me, I wasn't the one who made the decision, all that kind of hand washing. So it just makes me wonder if there was a shift there. But there is a human instinct not to get involved. But this is more than just calling 911, right? This says you see someone being dragged by a wild animal, you have to go in. So someone's being dragged by a wild animal, it's a little different than calling 911 because there's some possibility you could be hurt. Now, the
Also,
halachic literature, what's that?
I was just going to say, also in drowning, sometimes the person will pull you in with them. That's just your instinctual, unconscious mind.
Yeah, their instinct is to use you as a life raft. Just grab you. Yeah. And threatened by robbers too, right? If you see someone threatened by robbers, the safest thing for you to do is to like hide.
In general, if you undertake a rescue, you also undertake a duty to do it correctly. So that's where some people become apprehensive. In other words, there is no duty to rescue a stranger, but if you do it, you better do it correctly because if you don't, then you're under the duty to not be negligent in rescuing them. Otherwise, you incur liability. So,
No,
you know,
right. Now here you said stranger, right? Now here we're saying there is an obligation, but in the Hebrew it's not stranger. It's does anybody see in the Hebrew? Minayin leroa et havero. What's a haver?
And
Friend. What do you think it means here in this text? Do you only literally means your friend?
where I can't see the word in the Hebrew, which line is it?
I highlighted it. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
yeah, I was going to say it. There you go. Okay.
Okay.
Havero. It means his friend. So do you think it literally means his friend, or do you think it's broader than that?
I would
So
suggest it's broader because otherwise it wouldn't make
yeah,
sense.
otherwise it wouldn't mean anything, right? Yeah, if you like him, save him. So generally speaking, Chaver is normally refers to a Jew, but then they would say, well, a non-Jew you should save out of derech eretz, out of, we try to have peaceful relations with non-Jews. So in other words, you have an obligation to rescue them, even unlike what Ben was saying about American law, you do have an obligation to rescue them based on this verse. Right? The verse, but the wording in the verse, by the way, is reyecha, also your fellow. So if you wanted to, you could argue, oh, it only applies to Jews. My my 17-year-old daughter, or 16-year-old daughter who knows too much, she and a friend were doing lashon hara about a teacher, and I pointed it out the next day. I said, I think what you were saying, and she said, oh, lashon hara doesn't apply to non-Jews. I'm like, Sana, do you really want to hold that way? She's like, no, I don't. So if you want to be technical, it's you have to save Jews, but I think that's a bit much. Okay, another midrash. This midrash, by the way, also is in the Quran. The Quran quotes it. Um, this is one of the times where the Quran quotes Jewish books and not the Torah. Man was created alone to teach you that anyone who destroys one life is considered by the Torah as if he's destroyed the entire world. Anyone who preserves one life is considered by the Torah as if he's preserved the entire world. Any comments on this one?
I mean, it reminds me that, man is created in the image of Hashem. So that's
Right,
why
right.
this
That's
verse
also a
makes sense.
midrash, right? That's also or no, no. So the Torah says man is created in God's image, and then there's a midrash on that. Sorry, I was thinking about the midrash on that. It's a beautiful midrash that says, um, God is not like a normal king, a king of flesh and blood. When they make one coin in their image, all the coins look alike. But God, when God makes a coin in God's image, all the coins look different. So that's how we can all be in the image of God, but all look different. Um, okay. So no, that's not what I want. Okay, so now I mentioned the Talmud. So what the Talmud does is it takes these different sources and it plays different logical games with them. And they're often hard to follow. So here, let's see what they say, and let's figure out what their question is. Is the imperative to save a life really derived from do not stand aside when your fellow's blood is being shed? Isn't it derived from what's the source from this teaching? What's the source you must restore another's body if they're in danger of being lost? The Torah says you should return it to him. So what's the Talmud's question?
What authority we have to save somebody?
What's the source, right? I know you have the rule we have to save someone. Just what's the source? Which verse? So the Talmud is playing this kind of logical game. It's a kind of like one theory is that it's written for essentially law school students, for rabbinical students, to get them just to think very logically. It's not very practical. There's no practical, well, there doesn't seem to be a practical implication, right? Does it matter what verse I derive this from?
No, because the obligation is the same.
The obligation is the same. But then what happens is, let's say I derive it from you shall return it to him, then I must derive something else from do not stand aside. So that's the continuation of this logical game. Is that then I have to say, okay, well, what else do I learn from do not stand aside? And vice versa. If I learn it from this first verse, I got to learn something else from the second verse. Their answer, by the way, is that it's both. If we learn the obligation to save only from the verse you should return it, I might have thought it's only when I can save them by myself. But I don't need to exert myself to hire others. I don't need to hire anybody. So actually it gives do not stand aside to tell me I even have to hire someone to save someone else's life. Right. So actually it does say essentially it's from the second verse, but I need the first verse to teach me something else. Okay, so that's the kind of Talmudic back and forth that the Talmud loves to do. Any other questions about the nature of the Talmud? Because it's not, it's used as a basis for halacha, but it's not really a halachic work. It's really kind of logical discussions. Any other comments or questions about what Talmud is?
I would say there's an argument to be made here that it's not that rule, but it's another rule, the one that says that say that saving a life overrides all the other commandments and observances. I forget what the concept is called.
Pikuach nefesh.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. So then, I don't know what's the biblical source for Pikuach nefesh. Like, I don't know if this is the Torah source for Pikuach nefesh or something else.
Yeah, I was going to say,
so that's definitely something you can look up is like, okay, what's the source on Pikuach nefesh? I attended a lesson that none of my family members appreciated, but we went to this lesson on, I think it was on Shavuot last year, and this rabbi gave 15 possible sources for the prohibition on cruelty to animals. I thought it was great, but
that's great.
what's that? Yeah, to me it was groovy. My family did not appreciate it, right? Because it's not actually a practical conversation. So then when you fast forward to the Shulchan Aruch, what's a shulchan?
Table.
It's a table. And Aruch, we had this yesterday in our learners minion. What's Aruch?
Long.
No.
No.
Aruch is long. Aruch is long. Aruch is set, the set table.
Oh yeah, of course.
I'm setting out all the halachas for you. I'm setting out the halacha. Before the Shulchan Aruch, you'd go to a rabbi and you'd ask a question, and the rabbi would look this book, that book, and they give you an answer based on thinking it through. The Shulchan Aruch turns it into a law code. There were people who hated it. They said it's like caging a lion, right? That the real way you did halacha before the Shulchan Aruch is you knew 10 different cases, and then you'd say, in this case, it's this. There are famous stories about, there's a famous story about the Chafetz Chaim, where a woman comes to him Friday afternoon with a chicken and asks, is this chicken kosher? He says, yes. And his student was there at the time. And after his student says, what are you talking about? I was here Tuesday with the exact same problem, and you said it's not kosher. And does anybody know what the Chafetz Chaim said? So why did he kosher the chicken? So if he had told her it wasn't kosher, what was she going to eat for Shabbos? Right? So it was like he understood context. The Shulchan Aruch has no context. It's just, here's the law. So that's why people really disliked it. A good rabbi nowadays can paskin from all over. It's very easy to just open up the Shulchan Aruch and say what it says. So here's what it says. One who saw another drowning or threatened by robbers or wild animal and could have either saved him by himself or hired others to save him. Do you recognize from the Talmud there? Right? And he didn't. Or someone who heard the Gentiles and foreigners are plotting against someone and preparing to entrap him. That's actually the other verse where it talks about saving someone, right? That talks about returning them to themselves. And he didn't tell him. Or someone who knew that a Gentile or violent man was approaching his friend this is another separate mitzvah, right? The mitzvah of the rodef, the one who's being pursued. And he could have appeased him, changed his attitude, and didn't appease him. In all these situations, he's transgressed. Do not stand aside when your fellow's blood is being shed. So, right, it's this. How's this different from the Talmud? Right, it just gives the answer. Right, there's no conversation. It just gives the answer. Okay. The next midrash.
Did you have the Talmud open right before this, or was that
Oh,
also?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Okay. Wait, so I'm sorry, can you just quickly go like take 30 seconds, like so we can see the difference there?
Oh, okay, of course. So let me open it. I just closed that window. I apologize.
Oh, I think you can do Control Shift T to open a window you closed.
Oh, I went back to the link. Okay. By the way, this NLE Resources has really interesting packets on different topics. So here's the Hebrew of the Talmud, by the way. Right, in the center, we have the Talmud. On the right, we have the Rashi. On the left, we have the Tosafot, and all sorts of other commentaries and resources around the edges.
I see.
So here's where the Talmud just quotes the Midrash. So it's not really very Talmudic, and I think that might be actually the Mishnah. No, that's in the Gemara. So that's the Gemara quoting a Mishnah. But the Talmud that I was getting at is this. Right? Is the imperative from this verse? What about this verse? And then it says, no, if you just knew this verse, I wouldn't have known I had to hire someone. So we have this whole long conversation just to teach us. It's not just to teach us you have to hire someone, right? If it wanted to, the Talmud could have said, by the way, you have to hire someone. Right? So it has this whole long conversation because it wants to engage in the give and take. Okay?
Yeah.
All right, the next midrash is about Abraham and the idols. Does anybody know the story of Abraham and the idols? I grew up with it, but maybe it's not as popular outside of my village.
No, I read it, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. But I'm gonna remember it when we go over it.
Abraham smashing
I
the
think
idols.
I guess I know he destroyed all of them, right?
Destroy the idols. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I remember his dad, or I remember it this way, is like his Abraham's father came home and was, they had an idol shop and he was like, why are all these smashed? And Abraham said, oh yeah, well, they smashed each other. And his father was like, well, how? Of course they didn't, because they're just statues. And Abraham was like, yeah, exactly. That's my point.
Your ears hear what your mouth says. Okay, great. That's the Midrash. I grew up with that. That's the Abraham I grew up with. Is that the Abraham? Is that in the Torah?
No.
So here's what the Torah says. This is all the Torah says about Abraham before God suddenly appears to him and tells him to go on his spiritual quest. So as we read this, I want you to look for what's the hole, what's the gap in the text, and what are the hints. So look for gaps and hints. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he begot Terach. After the birth of Terach, Nahor lived 119 years and begot sons and daughters. When Terach actually, Lane, do you mind reading again?
Can you blow it up just a little bit?
Sure.
Birth of Terah, Nohar lived 119 years and
Am I-
begot sons. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry, I'm on the list. Okay, go ahead.
Sons and daughters. When Terah had lived 70 years, he begot Abram, Nohar, and Haran. Now this is the line of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nohar, and Haran. And Haran begot Lot. Haran died in the lifetime of his father, Terah, in his native land, Ur of the Chaldeans. Abraham and Nohar took to themselves wives, the name of Abram's wife being Sarah, and that of Nohar's wife, Malacha. The daughters of Haran, the father of Malachah and Iskar. Iskar. Now Sarah was barren; she had no children. Terah took the son Abram, the grandson of Lot, the son of Haran, and the daughter-in-law Sarah, the wife of his son Abram, and they set out for together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. The days of Terah came to 205 years, and Terah died in Haran.
Great, thank you. Whoops. So I forgot to mention the what happens after that according to the Midrash. So Abraham says to his dad, "Let your ears hear what your mouth says." So his dad turns him over to the dictator at the time, whose name was Nimrod. Nimrod tries to get Abraham to bow down to worship idols. Abraham refuses. They throw him into a furnace, and miraculously he survives. And then after that, Nimrod asks his brother, "Well, what do you think?" And his brother says, "Well, Abraham, was saved, so I'm going with that guy." So he's like, "I'm going with that guy," and then he was burned up when he was thrown in the furnace. So that's the Midrash. So is there anything in here, any gaps or hints? Are there any questions, like anything in here that raises a question that would lead you to something like that Midrash?
Well, I guess one question would be, it seems like you don't hear about anybody else leaving the land of Ur the Chaldeans,
So why
but
they
you
leave?
would, right? Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So the question, right? Why they leave? Right. Absolutely. Right. They're running away. Apparently, they're running away. By the way, um, Terach never made it. Right. When they came to Haran, they settled there. He didn't complete the job. But Terach had this great idea. He's like, got to run away, and didn't complete the job. Abraham actually couldn't leave. Good. So one question: why did he leave away? Any other questions that this text kind of begs?
One thing I'm wondering is another special, because I'm looking for things that are special about Abram here, is that he's married to Sarai and she is barren. So,
Yeah, and right. Most 3 out of 4 of the matriarchs at some point were barren. Yeah, that's not. I don't think that plays into this midrash. What about his brother, Haran? What happened to his
Does
brother?
yeah, he died.
He died. Do you want to know why he died? I wonder why he died. And so these are the breadcrumbs, right? This is what Midrash is going to try to put together. Because remember, I said, oh, he was thrown in the furnace. And the last breadcrumb that I don't think that, well, those of you who know Hebrew, his native land, Ur of the Chaldeans. Um, Ur of the Chaldeans. What does Ur mean?
light.
Light.
That's
Light.
yeah. I was gonna say sounds like
So
light.
Ur can be a fire or a furnace. So the Midrash says, oh, maybe Ur here is the furnace. That's where they get Abraham being thrown into the furnace. So
Hmm.
is there anything here that suggests that Abraham believed in God?
No.
No. But where do they get this idea that he must have had some revelation? What happens in the next chapter? So this is just before God says, I apologize, this isn't in here. What chapters? So Genesis 12. Right. Then suddenly God says to Abraham, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. So God picks Abraham apparently completely randomly, right? Like, why Abraham? So that's, to answer that, it comes up with this story of, oh, he must have had some sort of intellectual revelation. So that's where that's coming from. Another midrash on how Abraham had that revelation. Let me see if it's here. No. Yeah, here's the midrash that I think Forrest quoted earlier, right? He had to travel to a place. He left Abraham in charge of the store. The people come in, they feed the idol, right? And then they throw, and it ends with throwing Haran in the furnace, and that's Haran died in the face of his father Terach. There's another midrash that I really love that says, so our question, have you heard any other ways that Abraham discovered God? Because there's at least two other midrashim I know of. Anybody heard any other stories about how, or explanations about how did Abraham come to be the one God called?
Seems like in the back of my mind I recall something dealing with Lot, but I don't remember anything beyond that.
Okay.
What
So,
I Well, I'm not sure if you're going in this direction or not, but what I was thinking of is um the time that he and who was it? And someone else, Laban? No, I don't know. But they make a monument and it says Abraham called it by a Hebrew name and his brother or whoever it was called it by a different name, and it says that Abraham swore by
name of the Lord.
God, right? And then Nahor, yeah, and then his brother swore by the God of Nahor, which I guess.
Interesting. Okay. So maybe Abraham too, right? That also suggests Abraham had some sort of revelation that, connected him to Hebrew, connected him to God. So the other ones that I'm familiar with.
I remember, wasn't there something about him looking up into the sky and seeing the moon and the stars and the sun and something?
Yep.
And then they were always like they weren't there permanently. They were like coming and going and disappearing, and that's why he figured there must be somebody kind of moving them.
Yep.
Yeah,
So right, he looks at
Maimonides, he was saying that, he discovered him by just looking at nature and using Aristotle and nature and all that in order to figure it all out.
Yes. I was gonna say it's a very philosophical midrash, right? This idea is this idea of God as the unmoved mover, very philosophical midrash. The midrash is he looked at the sun, he thought that was God, and then the cloud covered the sun. So, oh, the cloud must be more powerful. The wind blew that away. The wind must be more powerful. I think somehow like the stars came and the stars came out now that the wind had blown away the clouds. Oh no, the sun went away and the stars came out, and then he realized, oh, none of them are God. There must be some force beyond them all. So that's a very philosophically influenced one. I'll get to philosophy in a little bit, but basically philosophy is an intellectual movement that was really pretty foreign to Judaism, but incorporated into Judaism around the time of Maimonides, maybe a little bit earlier, and you get things like that. Right, philosophy always has this idea that God is one, God is a unity, God never changes. Anything you hear like that is coming from that philosophical trend. The last midrash that I really like on this is it says this is like a person is walking in a city and he sees a tower and the tower is on fire. And he says, doesn't this tower have an owner? What's going on? And the owner of the tower pokes his head out of the window and says, I am the owner of the tower. So that's the midrash that I really like. What do you think that midrash is saying?
As far as this is that midrash is an explanation for Abraham having
How Abraham discovered God. Right. The question is, how did Abraham discover God? Right. We have Abraham living this, I don't know, normal life, except they left for some reason. And then suddenly God appears to him. well, God, how did he become the person that God would appear to?
He's seeing the moral failings of the people and his
Mhm.
family and people being
Right. So
like
yeah, he's seeing the moral failings. He's seeing the horrible things going on in the world, right? And then he says, "Isn't there a God?" And that's the moment God reveals himself. So actually, in that Midrash, if you think about it, it's not that he sees the perfection of the world and says, "Oh wow, there must be a God organizing all this." He sees the imperfection of the world, and he says, "Where the heck is God? Where's the owner?" And that's when God appears to him. Right? It's kind of the opposite of the philosophical approach. Philosophical approach, everything's so hunky dory. God's hunky dory. I'm hunky dory. Let's all sing kumbaya. And this approach is saying, no, the world's on fire. And actually, there's a book someone wrote called "The World is on Fire." Right? The world's on fire, and it's when we notice that we also start to notice where God is. I like that one. Any comments on that one?
So I guess this is sort of like a meta question here, but like when you say, "Oh, I like that one," and so like, are these just sort of, I don't know, just interesting ideas? Is there any canonical weight to these, or yeah? Can you unwrap
Yeah,
that for me?
that's a really good question. Um, so okay, there's 600,000 answers to that question is the problem. Um, the most right-wing answer is I saw on a Chabad calendar once that it said essentially everything on Sefaria was given to Moshe Mount Sinai. So all the Midrash was given to Moshe Mount Sinai. The problem is the Midrashim they're not mutually consistent with each other. So a more middle of I'll give you okay, so that's the right-wing extreme position. A kind of secular extreme position is to say these are Jews studying Torah, right? This is the sacred practice of making Mishnah, making Midrash. That's what they're doing. They're taking passages like this, they're asking questions, and they're using their imagination to fill in the holes. And that's a beautiful sacred practice. And there are people who continue this practice. There's an Institute for Contemporary Midrash, and they'll just say, look, this is Talmud Torah in its most beautiful sense. So it doesn't need to have been given to God on Mount Sinai to be holy. It doesn't need to be literally true to be holy. It's saying something, it's trying to express something deep. And then the middle ground says that, do you remember, I think it was a week or two ago, we said that God's word is multifaceted. It included Shamor and Zachor, observe and keep Shabbat, which for us require two words. I don't know, do you guys remember that? In the Charudi, it said that God said observe and keep in one word. But for us, for humans, so every word, and what I'm saying now, I'm quoting another midrash, but every word of the Torah has infinite meanings. And so when we do Torah study like this and use our imagination, we're actually unpacking one of those hidden meanings of the Torah. It's like unpacking a suitcase that's a portal into an infinite dimension. So each time we do that, we're unpacking one more meaning. Isaac Luria says there's 600,000 facets to the Torah. So what's the number 600,000?
The number of, it was a little more, wasn't it? The number of Jews
They round it down. They round it down,
yeah, in the desert.
Yeah, it's the number of so kind of on a deeper level, it's the number of souls. It's the number of Jewish souls. So if there's 600,000 facets to the Torah, what's that saying?
Each Jew has its own facet.
Each Jew each Jew reveals a unique facet of the Torah to the world. So when anybody does Torah study, they're revealing something holy. The Talmud says that even even the statements by the youngest student in the Beit Midrash were given to Moses at Mount Sinai. I don't think that literally means that Moses was told every single word. Said in 1837, when this kid is sitting there, he's going to say this, right? I think it means that Torah um, is an infinite text that includes all of those. That when that kid is saying that, there's something that's part of that revelation in Sinai. So now I'm getting mystical because the mystics say it's even though the Zohar says even though the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, it's still being given at Mount Sinai, meaning that Mount Sinai is not a just a one-time event; it's an ongoing event. And when we engage in Torah study, we're engaged in that ongoing event of revelation. So that's three answers to your question, Forrest. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so I mean some people would say, every word spoken, every, critical question that's raised and idea that's spoken about the Torah is itself, also, given at Mount Sinai, and some would say that, um, that it's an ongoing discussion. I guess really maybe there's camps of it literally was given and it was spiritually given, and yeah.
And it wasn't given, right? Yeah.
Well, what's
The ones
cool
who
is
say,
that if all the letters mean something, okay, then that means the spaces mean something, which is where Luria went.
yeah. So, and the ones who say it literally was given, there are certain midrashim that they will. I'm guessing there's certain midrashim they will say were literally given, and then I don't know where they draw the line because midrash was an ongoing thing that people were continuing to write for hundreds of years, and even continue to write now. So on that first extreme right viewpoint, I don't know where they draw the line. Okay, so that's Midrash. I love Midrash because it's creative, imaginative play with the text, personally. The next thing I want to do is Kabbalah. Um, and obviously, I could do a whole class session on Kabbalah. I did a PhD on Kabbalah. So Kabbalah assumes, first of all, that there are secret dimensions, unseen spiritual dimensions to the world. That what we see, that physical reality is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's a whole spiritual reality underlying everything. Another big thing in Kabbalah is there's a bit of a turn away from this idea that God is one, God never changes, and we talk about different aspects of God and God having different feelings and God being much more dynamic. These aspects of God, does anybody know what they're called?
Hater?
Sephiroth?
That's one of the aspects, but what are they as a group called?
Sephiroth?
Sephiroth.
Yeah, these are the Sphirot. So the Sphirot are these different attributes or energies or way God reveals God's self in the world. So earlier when we looked at the Torah, there was one interpretation that said, oh, this is God's love, this is God's judgment. So those are both energies or aspects of God. These different aspects, by the way, get called by different names. So when, sometimes God is called Adonai, Elohim. So those refer to different energies or Sphirot. Here we go. Hebrew translation. I don't want the Hebrew translation. Oh my gosh. Why am I getting Hebrew translation? Source. I don't know why I'm getting Hebrew. Oh, there we go. Okay, I apologize. I don't know why I'm getting Hebrew translation. Oh yeah. Okay, let me just pull up. Okay. So the Zohar, this is kind of the Bible of Kabbalah. The one of the earliest works is called Sefer Yetzirah. It's not necessarily a Kabbalistic work. No one knows when it was written. Sefer Haba here, Hechlot Rabadi, but this, what I was going to show you, is called the Zohar. The Zohar was written, traditionally they say it was written in the time of the Roman persecution, read by Shimon Bar Yochai, but the scholars say it was written in the 13th century in Spain. So I'll just show you the first paragraph just to give you a tiny, tiny taste. Rabbi Chizkiah opened his discourse with the text as a lily among the thorns. What does the lily symbolize? It symbolizes the community of Israel. Now, when he says community of Israel in the Zohar, it's not only referring to the Jews, it's referring to this the 10th, the lowest aspect of God, which is the Shekhinah, God's presence, where God manifests God's self in the physical realm. So these are like layers of layers of divinity between totally transcendent and this world. So the lily among the thorns then is God's presence in the world. As a lily among thorns is tinged with red and white, so the community of Israel is visited now with justice and now with mercy. Remember, I said justice and mercy are different attributes of God's, different energies of God. As the lily possesses 13 leaves, so the community of Israel is vouchsafed 13 categories of mercy, which surround it on every side. You know, we say the 13 attributes of mercy when we pray. For this reason, the term Elohim, right, that's God, and then that symbolizes this attribute of God, is separated by 13 words from the next mention of Elohim. So these words in the Torah don't take at face meaning, they have this deeper meaning symbolizing something in the spiritual realm. So that's fundamentally what the Zohar is about. Has anybody here experienced the Zohar at all? Or Ben, it sounds like you're familiar
Oh,
with some of it.
both Lane and I have the Sephro is actually used as an example in Scottish Rite of how one can go about interpreting the nature of God and developing a closer relationship to God and developing ourselves as men in that we realize that one side balances against the other, that you and as you progress you get you become a better person, the ultimate goal being to establish a closer relationship with God. You must become more godlike here on earth and act that way toward your fellow man.
Interesting, right? So and balance. So, and I think balanced and integrated is very much the ideal here for the Zohar, right? For
I've got
philosophy,
yeah.
yeah. What's that, Lane?
I was going to say I have the same edition you do, the Pitsky or however you say it edition.
Yeah, that's the best edition. So there's
I
been
just
multiple
picked up
editions.
a book called "A River Flows from Eden: The Language of Mystical Experience of the Zohar."
Good book.
My local rabbi recommended it, and it's pretty fascinating. It takes even just the text of the Zohar to a little bit deeper level.
Yeah, actually, I really want to read that book. By the way, I did that again. I don't know if you guys are on this level. I mean, I'm not saying that derogatorily. Like, if you are on the level where you want to be doing it straight from the text, I do have a Zohar study group Wednesday nights at 9 o'clock or 9:30 my time, 9:32 my time. So let me know if you're interested in joining. So yeah, so integration and balance, like you said, and integration are ideals for Kabbalah. So for philosophy, the ideal is kind of to be always stoic. God never changes, we should never really change. For Kabbalah, there's times, I mean, maybe this is a little unfair, but God never changes for philosophy. For Kabbalah, sometimes God is angry, sometimes God is merciful, God has essentially moods. So the quintessential Jewish Kabbalist is Maimonides. So here's an example of Maimonides on angels. So given what I just said about Zohar believes in a spiritual realm. What would the Zohar say about angels?
You've got the angel of death and the so I
In
mean you've
general,
got
what would it say?
both good and
Do they
bad.
exist or not? Do they exist or not?
Oh yeah.
Oh, there's all
Yeah.
different kinds of
There's
angels.
all kinds of angels. Do they exist? They're all around us. We
They're
don't see
everywhere.
them all. If we could open our eyes, we'd see them, right? Like Bilam, right? There's the episode of Bilam and the donkey in the Torah where this non-Jewish prophet's riding along on the donkey sees the angel, he doesn't, right? If we can open
Right.
our eyes, we would see the angels all around us.
Well, yeah,
The
the
Zohar
Jacob's
says, like,
ladder.
you would be
Different.
astonished how many angels and other spiritual forces are flying around us all the time. That's
And it's not
Kabbalah.
just angels, it's different kinds of angels doing different
Shadim
kinds
and
of things.
100%. Souls who are like who can't get out of this world, but who are a D-book that's wandering this world. Um, there's a great Halloween movie. It's an old Yiddish movie called The D-book, and it's funny because it's funny. It's so antiquated, but it's about like this woman who gets possessed by a soul that wasn't able to leave this world. So philosophy, on the other hand, the goal of philosophy, excuse me a second, nowadays, we, when you think about philosophy departments in universities and stuff, it's a little unclear what they study. I had the impression at Dartmouth, they were just always looking for something that was really true. Um, Philosophy in the ancient world was science, right? Aristotle, he did biology, he did physics, philosophy is simply science, ancient science. So Maimonides, trying to have Jewish philosophy, is trying to reconcile Judaism and science. So there's a bunch of obvious places where science doesn't seem to coincide with Judaism, right? One of them is angels, one of them is miracles, right? Can the sun simply stop in the sky? Can the sea simply split, right? Science will tell us, nope, can't happen. So Maimonides tries to reconcile it, and in general, science wins. So let me find his here. So here's what he says about angels. Now you already know. So what would a scientific person today say about angels?
Scientific person that they don't exist.
Yeah, they don't exist.
Or that
Maybe
there's
they'd
some.
say, what's that, Lane?
I would say that it's a representation of things like emotions and uh, other types of uh,
Yeah,
segments of psychology.
right. Or you can be angelic, right? I remember, meeting a person and they're like an angel. So here's what Rambam says. You already know it's very difficult for people to apprehend, except after strenuous training, something that's devoid of physicality. We can't imagine something that's not physical. God, right? For Rambam, God's not physical at all. Um, he's extreme, right? If God's not physical, we can't even imagine God. Because of the difficulty of this matter, the books of the prophets contain statements whose external sense can be understood as signifying that angels are corporeal, right? The Torah seems to suggest angels have bodies. They can move, they have human form, that they're given orders by God and carry out God's orders. That does seem to be what the Bible suggests. But here's what he says. All forces are angels. So in other words, the force of gravity is an angel. The force of love is an angel, right? A little like what Lane was said earlier about how human emotions. How great is the blindness of ignorance and how harmful. If you told a person who is one of those who deem themselves as one of Israel's sages that God sends an angel who enters the womb of a woman and forms a fetus there, he'd be pleased with this assertion and would accept it and would regard it as a manifestation of greatness and power on the part of the deity. So, but if you tell him that God has placed in the sperm a formative force shaping the limbs, and this force is an angel, that the man would shrink from this opinion. So what's Rambam saying about that an angel is?
I'm not really understanding the juxtaposition that he's making
Okay,
here.
so he's saying, okay, let's take a classic Orthodox rabbi. Now I'm saying Orthodox. In those days, it would just be Talmudically trained rabbi. I have one in mind, right? If you told this person that an angel made a woman pregnant, you'd say, wow, mazel tov. But if you said that actually the sperm made the woman pregnant, and that we just call that force in the sperm, we call it a malach, we call that an angel, that person would say, no, 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 what are you talking about? Right? So Rambam is saying, but really, what's right according to Rambam? According to Rambam, right? Did an angel do it like without sperm, or was it like the angel is that form of generativity in the sperm?
The latter.
Yeah, that's what Rambam's saying. By the way, that so does Rambam believe in angels
As he defines them.
as he defines them? Yeah, right. What the Zohar is saying, oh, angels are swarming everywhere. Rambam would say, yeah, they're part of reality. That's in everything. They're not something separate God creates. They kind of fiddle with the nature of reality. They just are the nature of reality. When we talk about angels, when we talk about all these things, it is the nature of reality. There's no
Well,
separate spiritual realm.
He's
What's that?
chasing the angel. He's chasing the angel. It's still there, but he's just chasing. Where is it?
Well, he for him the angel is, it's like he uses the metaphor of the clock, right? That God to the world is like the force of, I don't remember what the kind of properties that allow for the clock to work. The angel is, it's like the law, the physical laws that allow for everything to happen. That's what God and the angels are.
How does he square that with the donkey seeing an angel? And how does he square that with the angel of death? And how does he square that with the other things in the Torah?
Well, angel of death is easy, right? Because the angel of death, that's death. That's the power of death in the universe. And that's for him a very important power, because he says if we didn't have death in the universe, we wouldn't have the recycling of material and rebirth. We'd be overpopulated, it wouldn't work. So death we're good with. Um, Probably he would say that Bilam's donkey seeing an angel is a metaphor. I mean, I'd have to look up that passage specifically, but that's my guess.
Mm-hmm.
He does say that Abraham being visited by the three angels was a vision. They didn't really visit him.
You see?
Yeah. He's famous for this idea where he says that if the Torah and science contradict, you can always reinterpret the Torah. Okay.
Who says that? I'm sorry.
Maimonides says that in the Guide for the Perplexed. He says the gates of
Okay.
interpretation are open. That if you
I just
find a
haven't gotten that
contradiction
far.
between science and science, right? Because God is truth, so the Torah cannot be untrue, and philosophy, he believes, is true. It's funny though, because he has some. There's some places where he's entirely wrong. So one funny, to me, funny is he says, you can imagine a uh, a flying ship made of iron, but obviously it's impossible, right? So there's places where, what he assumes is true is limited by, you know, he's also anti-imagination. So the mystics love the imagination. Um, for him, like imagination is bad. We should be entirely rational. The last two, any other questions about philosophy?
Well, if he thought we should be entirely rational, did he not buy into the idea that, um, you know, we study the Torah and we write Midrashim?
He did not like Midrash. He
Oh,
liked the Torah. He thought the Torah was the greatest law book, the greatest code um, ever to work towards our physical and spiritual well-being as a society. So he thought the Torah was great, but Midrash, he's not a fan.
I see.
Okay, so the two modern movements. In the modern period, to be an educated Jew up until, let's say, the 1700s meant to study a lot of Talmud. And in Jewish schools, that's what they studied, a lot of Talmud. And we saw, right, it's very intellectual. It's not really practical. It's not even necessarily spiritual. It's very intellectual. So the first reaction to that, which is coming out of Kabbalah, but is called Hassidut, Hasidism. And Hasidism wanted to make it so to be a really good Jew, to be a good Jew meant to be an educated Jew, which meant to study a lot of Talmud, maybe also a lot of Kabbalah. And the Baal Shem Tov said, no, to be a good Jew, you have to serve God with joy. You have to be committed. That's what Chassid means, to be pious, to be devout. It doesn't have to be so well learned. So there's a lot of stories out of the Hasidic world along this vein. One classic story is about a guy who was going to blow shofar on Rosh Hashanah. So he goes to the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov teaches him all of these secret meditations he should be thinking when he blows the shofar. So then he gets to Shul on Rosh Hashanah, and he forgets them all. He can't remember a single one of these. And so he's about to blow shofar, and he's just so upset, and he's just like crying, like, oh my God, I can't remember any of these. I hope this works. And he was so worried, he asked the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov said that was wonderful, because elsewhere the Baal Shem Tov says, there's a lot of keys, but there's one key that can open any lock. So what's the one key that can open any lock? Anybody know?
God?
Yeah, a rock. I was thinking a hammer. Yeah, sledgehammer. Sledgehammer will open any lock. So that key for him was the key of a broken heart, right? So Judaism becomes much more accessible to ordinary people.
That reminds me of the story about the Baal Shem Tov asking Elijah, who will be my neighbor in heaven or hell?
Mm-hmm.
And the two different answers he gets.
Yep.
What's that one?
What's that?
I was wondering what that story is.
Yeah, so if he goes to hell, he basically visits this guy who observed every law of Shabbat, doesn't speak to his family, is completely joyless, has this miserable Shabbat, but he observed every law. That's who would be his neighbor if he goes to hell. And if he goes to heaven, it's this guy who has this huge party Friday night, is non-observant, doesn't keep kosher, doesn't keep Shabbos, doesn't pray, has a huge party Friday night where he invites everybody over. There's lots of drinking and singing and candles and everything. And he asked this guy what his story is. It turns out his parents were murdered by the Cossacks. And all he remembers is that they were Jewish, and Friday nights there was lots of singing, and it was joyous, and there was singing and drinking. And so he just does that because it's the only way he knows to be Jewish. And that's right. So that person is going to heaven. So that's right. That's the joy. I thought I had, where's the 18 here? So here's an example of one of his teachings. Always ensure that you serve your creator with no ulterior motives. To accomplish such a degree of sincerity, you need to be clever. It's so deep, who can find it? It requires constant attention. Don't allow your mind to be distracted from it even for a moment. A single distraction is all it takes. Second, be careful about immersion in the mikveh at all appropriate times. So the Hasidim in Jerusalem, they go to the mikveh every day. When immersing, focus on the meditations that relate to immersion in mikveh. A thread woven of 3 strands, we are told, is not easily broken. This thread is completed with one last item. Stay far away from depression. Let your heart rejoice in God. Right? So it's very, very simple, joyous, heartfelt Judaism. The last kind of, and there's a whole world of Hasidic literature. The last movement is Mussar. So the Mussar movement, so you remember I said that in the 1700s, to be a good Jew was to study a lot of Talmud. And then in the 1800s, the Baal Shem Tov introduced this idea that heartfelt service of God. What's missing though? What about being a nice person? Right? Where's that? Character development. It's not there, right? Now, the
Wouldn't
Talmud,
that be part of service to God?
so the Hasidim will say that's part of service to God. Yes. The Talmudic people will say that's part of Torah study. But Mussar says, you know what? We need to set aside separate time to study character, to develop our character traits. It's too intellectual. That Talmud study alone is too intellectual. And they weren't really reacting to Hassidut as much, but you need to focus on ethics. So there's a classic story that the Chafetz Chaim. So the Chafetz Chaim is one of the famous Mussar rabbis. He's the one who wrote about Lashon Hara, about the forbidden speech. He says the test of whether you've studied Talmud adequately, the graduation test, is if you're sitting at a table with your friend and the window's open, it's blowing in their face, and you get up and close the window. Now, according to halakha, am I obligated to close the window?
No?
No, I guess you just failed the Talmud for real. But like according to Shulchan Aruch, no. There's no right. So what he's saying is that Talmud study needs to develop that sensitivity in myself so that I'll be so sensitive to someone else's feelings that I will be inspired to get up and close the window. Right? It's not just intellectually understanding the results of the Talmud. It's about character development. And so they started schools where they took time to meditate on these different character traits. They would, if they found them, there was this whole idea that if you find yourself having one character trait, you should practice the opposite. So if I find myself being greedy, I should practice being excessively generous to try to correct it. So that's the Mussar movement. So all of these, right, when we talk about Torah study and trying to do Torah study every day, all of these different things are parts of Torah study. And as you think about developing a Torah study plan for yourself, right? What am I going to study, every week for an hour, every week for a couple times a week, whatever it is. Because the Mishnah, the Midrash, the Pirkei Avot says you should set aside a fixed time for Torah study. So we should all have some fixed time. And it can really be anything from that whole menu, right? I showed you that whole menu. And this is a great place to start. I don't know why it's giving me Hebrew now. There we go. This is a great place to start. There's also some really good websites where you can find Jewish books. So any websites you guys already know to find for Jewish learning? So,
well, I hesitate. There is a part of the URJ that has a Mussar section that has numerous topics that are rich in exploration. And of course, we were pointing toward that because of our Rabbi Gervis, who was here.
To be honest, what I do is, I have books already, and then these books quote other books, and then I kind of go from there,
Good. So we used to call it, in the yeshiva, we call it Sefer surfing. Right? Sefer means book. So, and with Sefaria, it's nice. You can do that. You can find any book. So I already showed you Sefaria. Another great source for Torah study that I recommend is, Chabad.org has a ton of stuff. I don't know if you've looked at their website, but if you look here at Learning, they give you weekly Torah study.
That every week. That's great stuff. And they got quizzes there. That's just, yeah.
Kabbalah, Hasidism, Jewish mysticism, right? We just talked about those. Talmud, Torah and science, ethics and morality. There we have our Mussar. Another website that's great is Torah.org. So we have Torah portion, observance, that's halacha. Study, so you see ethical classics, that's our Mussar, a lot of Mussar here. Basics of Judaism, Jewish thought. They have a ton of stuff on Torah.org. Aish.com. Now, Aish means, what does Aish mean?
Woman.
What's that? No, that's Isha. Isha is
Oh,
woman.
yeah.
Fire.
Aish is fire. Good. So there's an organization called Aish HaTorah, the Fire of the Torah. It's an Orthodox Kiruv outreach organization, and their website is terrific. Torah portion, Intro to Judaism, courses, 48 Ways to Wisdom, Holocaust Studies, Prayer and Kabbalah, Shabbat, Ask the Rabbi, all sorts of stuff. And then the last one, as far as books, a good source for books is ArtScroll. So if you look on here on their categories, just their categories is amazing. So, shoot, that's annoying. Books. So let's go to Mussar and Ethical Insights. We have all sorts of stuff. And the thing they're really good at is doing Hebrew English so you can learn the Hebrew while studying it.
Right now, they're pushing the Sachs commentaries. That was their big thing.
Yeah, Jonathan Sachs' stuff is great. He gets a little repetitive. We have like 2 or 3 of his weekly commentaries, and sometimes it's like, wait a second, it's the same thing. But his stuff is great. I highly recommend his weekly commentaries.
Where does the Tanya fit into all of this?
Okay, so Hassidut has different rebbes, every rebbe of a town, and that town would have a certain spiritual lineage.
Correct.
So Chabad Hassidut comes from Shner Zalman of Liadi, who was pretty early Hasidic teacher, and he wrote this book called the Tanya. And all of his disciples encourage people to read and study the Talmud. I actually think, this is like off the topic, that, okay, so the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hassidut, he had a dream that Elijah appears to him. And he asks Elijah, when are you going to come? That's what you're supposed to ask Elijah if you see him in a dream, by the way. Okay, so just remember that. If you see Elijah in a dream, just give him a little nudge, say, so Nu, when are you coming? So Elijah says, when your well springs flow out, right? Meaning when everyone learns your teachings. So there's a number of Hasidic teachers who wrote books trying to create this kind of spiritual world's global spiritual enlightenment that would lead to the Messianic era. So the Tanya was his book he wrote to create spiritual enlightenment. I did my dissertation on Rabbi Nachman's book, Likutei Moharan, also, which he viewed as this kind of, it's not just a book, right? I'm trying to redeem the world through spiritual enlightenment. And that's why you see Chabad going out and trying
their efforts to get out there in the community and bring more people to it.
Yeah, they're not just serving their congregants, they're trying to bring the side. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share today. I'll see you. So, the schedule. The schedule. So I'll see you guys next week. The week after that, we're taking off for Rosh Hashanah. The week after that, we're good. And then, let me find. Yeah, on Sukkot, Sukkot falls on a Tuesday night and Wednesday. And so for Sukkot, I think I said we'd meet on I think I said Thursday. And then off for Simchas Torah, and then back onto regular schedule. Yes, Saskia.
I was just going to say, for those of us in Europe, I mean, I'm going to make it to the class next week, but I'm going to have to eat because it's shortly after, because of the time difference. It's very shortly before we have to leave for shul for service for Yom Kippur.
Okay.
So I don't want to be rude, but I'm going to have to eat.
No, that's not rude at all.
I'm going to try to make a Talmud tomorrow, but I may be in the airport. I'm not sure, but I'll try to see you tomorrow.
Okay, sounds good. And then for the next class, I want you to dig up your own research in this. I know those of you who've been around me long enough know that there's not going to be just one answer to this question, but what do Jews believe? Whether it's looking at the 13 principles of Maimonides or other sources you find, or you have books on the topic, we're just going to kind of get next class, we're going into fundamental principles. What do Jews believe? Okay. See you guys next week. Bye.